In this episode of Pedagogy After Dark, you'll learn why every teacher should be a teacher of literacy. I'm glad we're having this conversation at the beginning of the year instead of at the end of the year. I imagine it's really frustrating to be a history or science teacher and suddenly find your class preempted in February or March, and yourself all of a sudden teaching English. Now, if that feels wrong, it's probably because it's not the best way to approach the concept. However, usually these things are done out of necessity. Our students need lots of help reading informational texts. And the great thing about teaching social studies or science is that these courses give students an authentic reason for reading in the content areas. However, instead of waiting until the end of the year to sort of try to overload students with this sort of content, what we should do is be integrating literacy skills all throughout the year. Now, oftentimes, in order for everyone to get on board, that means we have to form a common language or definition for what literacy really is. It is not the teaching of English language arts standards. Those will be things that are only taught in ELA courses. Things like reading short stories, where you don't get that anywhere else. What literacy really is the ability to make connections, solve problems, and communicate your new understandings. Now, if you dig down really deep, these are not standards that are relegated to any one content area. These are things that you have to be able to do in all content areas in order to be literate. So that there is mathematical literacy, scientific literacy, and historical literacy. There are certain texts you only encounter in a particular subject area. What that means is that students are learning in all of their classes to integrate and connect the information so that a truly literate student can read in science class and connect it to something that they learned in history class. Your students should be aware of how technological innovations, how they affect the economy, and vice versa. That is a student who is truly literate. Your students have to be able to solve problems. And part of being literate and being able to read in multiple content areas, in multiple subject areas, is the ability to apply that information to your current situation. Our students can't do that if they cannot read to solve their own problems, if they do not have a functional basis for literacy in every single key subject area. Students must be able to communicate understandings. We know from research that students retain much more of the information that they speak back, so that debates in class are important. But also, expressive processes like writing are going to be essential to your students understanding, processing, retaining, and eventually owning the information that you're giving to them. Now, that being said, how do we get to a place where every teacher is a teacher of literacy? It begins by accepting the pure fact that we are all responsible for the literacy of our students. That no one teacher can teach all the reading skills for all subjects. What that would mean is that we're suggesting that English teachers are perhaps the best people to teach students to read legal and constitutional documents. And I don't think that that's true. We are not suggesting that English teachers are the best teachers to teach students to read research and scientific literature. What we must do is integrating a certain foundation in all of our classes, that any student who comes to school with the love of science leaves with the love of literacy as well, because they need to read, they need to write, they need to be able to speak and listen inside that content area. We have in our store the Common Core posters, and the great thing about these posters is that they are applicable to all content areas. RI or RL4, for example, says that students need to be able to understand how words function inside of a text. But the reason for that is because by understanding the expressions of others, we're able to integrate those expressions, those words into our own vocabulary and help us be better able to express our own thoughts. Why do students need to cite information and evidence? Because the world will challenge them to defend their own positions. That's something that happens with scientists. I can't just put forth a theory and everybody else is going to jump on it. I'm going to have to defend that theory with not only research, with not just my own studies and findings and data, but with the words and the works of others. I also have to be able to communicate that in a straight enough I also have to be able to draw a clear enough line between my conclusions and the data that I've been given. And that's something that happens in scientific literature. There are so many applications and so many examples, but the biggest thing is that we have to explore ways to integrate reading, writing, listening, and speaking into all of our courses. Those are not things that are strictly within the realm of the English language arts classrooms. They are the responsibility of us all if we want students who are truly college and career ready. Let's consider for a moment the hundreds of thousands of functionally illiterate adults who live in the United States. These adults can often read and decode everyday essential ideas, concept, words. They take the subway, they work at jobs, they do a lot of the activities we would assume based on sort of myths about illiteracy that people wouldn't be able to do. And yet they can. The things that they're unable to do revolve around more complex integrations of things like decoding and speaking and listening and being able to perform more complex functions. Ultimately, what they lack the ability to do is to make connections between the words and thoughts that they see on paper and hear from others and apply them to their own lives. That also means they lack the ability to apply that information to their own problems in a way that benefits themselves. They cannot communicate their own needs and understandings in a way that allows them to advocate for themselves. And so, what we can come to understand as literacy is the ability to make connections, solve problems, and communicate your understandings. Now, it's easy to suggest that this is within the realm of an ELA classroom, that English teachers are responsible for teaching those really big concepts and critical skills for everyone. But the reality is there are certain applications and connections and even communications that are specific to the scientific arena or to mathematics or history, so that it is not plausible to think that it's the English teacher's responsibility to teach students how to read historical documents or to use the Constitution as a basis to defend themselves and their beliefs or their practices. It is not reasonable to suggest that an English teacher is the best person suited to teach a student how to read a scientific article or a research paper and form a conclusion about whether or not they want to go through with a surgery or a procedure. These are things that modern day Americans struggle with more than you might think. And the reason is because that our students are leaving our high schools ill-equipped because we are relegating these critical skills to a single hour of their day, when in reality, students who are reading in history and science and mathematics even, going to be students who are better equipped to address all of these things and solve their own problems in the world. Because history and science give an authentic reason to read, students are often more engaged and more likely to apply the skills if they're taught. And so, how do we incorporate these literacy standards into our classrooms? There's a few steps that we can begin to take immediately. One is to incorporate writing into our daily practice. There are 3 types of writing that are easy to begin to incorporate into your lesson plans. One of those types of writing is to use writing as an engagement strategy, to ask a question that students may already know the answer to allow them the ability to express their own thoughts and ideas and emotions, and to use that to engage them in the process. For example, in one of our units, a historical perspective on wealth, one of the questions simply asked students what their experiences are with the game of Monopoly. Now, after that, we use that to transition into understanding what a monopoly is, how it affects the economy, and the origins historically of the game. From there, our students might use writing as an assessment for learning. which means that they're going to use writing as a way of coming to an understanding on their own. And so after learning about what a monopoly is and the historical origins, the students are asked basically to respond with what are their thoughts about why this game might have been so popular at this time in history. And finally, writing is used as an assessment to understand how these historical ideas form enduring understandings. And they write to that prompt by being able to explain how the practices, the economic practices, and the industrial accomplishments of the time continue to affect the way that we do business in America today. I know that my students don't just understand that concept. They understand the role of that concept within the broader context of history. I know that my students are, in that case, historically literate. This is just one of the examples. Writing in content areas is so crucial. But other things include thinking about things in a more connected way. Looking at things like history and even science as one continuous story that plays out where all the ideas are connected to each other, and having the students understand these transitions, that these transitions are important. One of the ways that this is done is by looking at a lot of things more thematically than we currently do. What I mean by that is everyone has their standards, and it's great. We want to cover our standards. We want to make sure we've addressed the topics that we're supposed to. We want to make sure students understand the facts at the heart and as a platform for what they're going to know. But the next thing is to really think about essential questions. What questions does this information help us answer? But there's a step beyond that again has usually fallen within the realm of English teachers, which is to consider the big picture, the theme, to understand that people in history are heroes and villains, that they're characters in a much larger story. And so the second thing that teachers can do in order to bring this broader concept of literacy into the classroom is to add a third tier, which is enduring understandings. When I teach the American Revolution, I don't just teach the events that led up to it, that precipitated it. I don't just teach the people who died in it, the important dates of wars. What I really want my students to come away with, away from this unit with, is the knowledge that freedom isn't free, and that no matter what it is that you want to accomplish, it will inherently involve a struggle, and that even if you decide that something is so important that you are on the right side of history, well, there are consequences. And it's that simple. When you teach world history, there's a broader idea. Understanding that in Europe and in the Middle East and in certain places in Africa, there will always be conflict because resources are limited. And understanding how human beings operate in those conditions will help your students be able to go into their communities and understand their own behavior and the behavior of groups like gangs and politicians. All of these things speak to a better understanding about how all things are interwoven and connected. And that is not something that is solely within the purview of an English teacher. So one of the first things that we have to do is we have to start to think about this differently. We have to start thinking about them as English standards and start thinking about them as critical skills. That way, we do away with the need to preempt classes towards the end of the year because our students aren't ready. We've been preparing them to be ready the entire year. There's a third strategy I could probably add, which is teaching vocabulary the right way. It's easy to say that, I'm going to give a student a list of vocabulary words. They're going to study them for a test. And you'll find that some students do and do it fairly well. Ask them again in a few months and you'll find that they've forgotten because the urgency isn't there. They knew that they had to learn the information for the test. But the sense of urgency is no longer there when they don't apply it and continually use this information. Another way that you can help your students with skills is to teach vocabulary the right way. That means often not just giving your students a list of vocabulary words, but helping them understand that words are not arbitrary, that prefixes, root words, and suffixes have a meaning that is always there. So that dem means people, whether it's in the word democracy or demagogue or Democrats. Okay, and understanding how the subtle differences in those words affect meaning and help you to express yourself. One of the big standards in Common Core is about citing evidence, and that is just a crucial concept for our students to know. Whether they're going to be scientists who put forth a theory, or mathematicians who believe there's a better way to calculate relativity, or historians or politicians who want to justify a political action, they're going to be challenged to defend their positions. And it's important that students start to see other informational texts, other resources as a platform and a basis for the information that forms their opinion. It's crucial that students understand how ideas develop over time and where they came from, lest we have citizens who simply believe the last thing they've heard. It's crucial that students understand how ideas develop and where they came from before drawing permanent conclusions. Because ideas are powerful or dangerous depending on how we harness them. It is important that we teach students how to harness ideas. We do that by reading and writing and speaking out about what we believe. Those are not English standards. They are standards that should be set in every classroom. It is crucial that students learn to think critically, speak consciously, and read continuously so that they are empowered to change their future, and so that we, as teachers, do what we always say in closing: have fun teaching.